Okay, as we wait for other colleagues and people to join, please let me dive in. And before diving into the agenda, let me quickly go through some housekeeping details to ensure everything runs smoothly today. First, kindly note that the meeting will be held in French and English with simultaneous interpretation. Please, if you can name your names to indicate your country or your organization. Please also type all comments in the chat. We'll be able to respond to that during the Q&A session. Please mute your microphone when you are not speaking to avoid background noise. You will be invited to turn on your videos after the opening segment for the group photo. Also, you will have the opportunity to ask questions during the Q&A session. We kindly ask you to be concise with your question. The moderator will call upon participants to take the floor. And thank you. Okay, I see that all the speaker has joined the meeting. So let us start. Again, good morning and good afternoon, colleagues, friends, and all protocol observed. To start our discussion, we will first hear from Mr. Rashid Ali Abdallah, who is the Executive Director of AFREC, who will provide some opening remarks. Mr. Rashid, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mahdi. Are you hearing me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen,
Yes, Mr. Rashid, please proceed. We can hear you. I think Mr. Rashid is facing some issues. You are muted, sir.
Yes, Mahdi.
Yes, please go.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, yes, please. We can hear you now.
Yeah.
You can proceed.
Dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. First, I would like to welcome you all to this webinar, focusing on timely topic of the methane detections and mitigation in the oil and gas sectors. Your positive response to our call on the topic is testament to the significance of the methane mitigation as a part of the global climate action. Secondly, I would like to thank the United Nations Environmental Programme, UNEP, through the International Methane Emission Observatory and Carbon Limit for partnering with us in advancing this agenda in African oil and gas sectors. The African Energy Commission, AFREC, is a specialized agency of African Union responsible for energy. AFREC broad mandate includes supporting African Union member states through policy development, capacity building, and mobilizing of financial and technical support. In addition to the program on capacity building, AFREC play a leading role in the continent in disseminating energy data and statistics, renewable energy promotion and development, supporting energy efficiency improvement across all sectors, transition to the clean cooking, bioenergy modernization, and oil and gas, among others. In the oil and gas program specifically, we support the African Union member states in their efforts to sustainably develop their oil and gas discovery, with the aim of expanding the domestic market on the continent. This is strategic in pivoting the just energy transition in Africa while supporting access to the energy or electricity to the more than 600 million African without access to electricity and 1 billion African without access to clean cooking. We foresee natural gas and LPG planning a key role in the short to medium term as the transition fuel. However, we are aware that continued developing oil and gas has potential to increase greenhouse gas emission in the continent. This includes methane emission from facility and processes in oil and gas operation. With many recent discovery of the oil and gas in Africa in several parts of the continent, and the expansion of refinery and pipeline, it is important that these developments are carrying out sustainably. This is why today's webinar is very important for all African countries. We have therefore embarked on supporting our member states to meet their emission reduction commitment through climate conscious oil and which focus on oil and gas producing member states. As I conclude, allow me to note that today's webinar and indeed the forthcoming training on the methane detection and mitigation is testimony of our growing collaboration with the various partners to support Africa member states in meeting their climate goals. I would like to thank UNEP and Carbon Limit once again for making this possible.
Unfortunately, I think we have lost Mr. Rashid. Yeah. Apologies for some technical issue with the network and bandwidth that we are facing in Algeria. Gentlemen, colleagues, and ladies and gentlemen, I have just shared in the chat the program for today, and let me please summarize it quickly. So we just heard from Mr. Rashid some opening remarks. Following that, we'll invite the government engagement manager at UNEP, Ms. Megan Demeter, to also give some opening remarks, followed by a group photo. So I will encourage you later to turn on your camera. After that, we will hear from my colleague and friend here at AFREC, the program leader for oil and gas, who will give us an overview of the AFREC oil and gas program. Following that, Julia Ferrini, the OGMP manager at UNEP, will discuss the oil and gas methane partnership. Moving forward, Benjamin Harris, the principal consultant at Carbon Limits, will lead us through the topic of methane emission detection and mitigation in the oil and gas sector. We will then open the floor for question and answer. Please feel free to use the raise hand future to participate. Lastly, Mr. Rashid will join us again to provide some closing remarks. I think the problem from our side is still persistence. So without any further ado, it's my honor and pleasure to invite Ms. Megan Demeter, the government engagement manager at UNEP, to give us some opening remarks. The floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Mehdi, and colleagues. It's a pleasure to be here today to speak on behalf of the United Nations Environment Programme's International Methane Emissions Observatory on this critical climate opportunity. The urgency of climate action is greater than ever as the effects of climate change continue to be felt around the world. Across the African Union, countries are experiencing more frequent and extreme weather events that pose a threat to livelihoods, food security, and health. We need to act now in order to slow down global warming, including by reducing methane emissions. Methane mitigation is critical in any decarbonization scenario and represents an urgent chance to address global warming promptly as we transition towards a net zero world. Methane has a global warming potential that is 80 times greater than carbon dioxide in the short term. And therefore, methane is responsible for about 1/3 of the warming that we're experiencing today. We cannot meet the global methane pledge and the Paris Agreement without direct targeted action on methane emissions. Methane is increasingly becoming a global climate priority as governments and companies are increasing ambition on emissions. But there is still currently a gap between the reduction levels that have been pledged by the global community and the levels that we need in order to avert the worst impacts of climate change. In order to achieve the reductions necessary, we need better information and more accurate data on methane emissions. This is what we're aiming to do through UNEP's International Methane Emissions Observatory. IMEO aims to provide open, reliable, and actionable data to the stakeholders who can act to reduce emissions. We'll hear today from my colleague Julia about one of the ways in which we at IMEO are working to improve data through the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0. OGMP is managed by IMEO and is a partnership of over 140 member companies with operations in over 70 countries, representing 40% of global oil and gas production. Through the OGMP, we're working to facilitate methane emissions reduction as OGMP companies commit to adopting methane reduction targets and reporting their emissions from operated and non-operated assets at an unprecedented level of accuracy and granularity. By helping companies get better data on methane emissions, OGMP is supporting the plan for targeted and effective mitigation action on methane. We have many companies with operations across Africa already, including several African countries, African companies already in the partnership, and we encourage more companies to join to enhance data accuracy that is absolutely critical for the reduction of methane emissions in the near term. We also conduct a series of scientific measurement studies that aim to improve our understanding of where emissions are coming from and what must be done to address them. We've conducted a number of satellite and on-the-ground measurement studies already in Algeria, Angola, and Gabon, and are in the process of planning a study in Nigeria. The goal of these studies is to connect data to action by filling the gaps on the location and magnitude of methane emissions and identifying opportunities for mitigation. We're also working to provide rapid data from satellites through IMEO's Methane Alert and Response System, which is enabling a direct data to action pipeline for stakeholders around the world. Many member states in the African Union have already taken an important step to address methane emissions by joining the Global Methane Pledge, which aims to cut methane emissions by 30% by 2030. UNEP applauds this commitment and encourages the use of empirical data to drive the mitigation that's needed in the short term. We're here today to deepen our understanding of methane emissions and identify opportunities for the next steps towards mitigation. In this regard, we're very pleased to participate in this webinar and provide this initial training in collaboration with our colleagues at Carbon Limits, and thank AFREC for the support convening this event and for the commitment to raise awareness on the importance of methane emissions and of reducing these emissions as quickly as possible. At UNOPS-IMEO, we stand ready to support member states of the African Union on this critical climate opportunity, and we look forward to this future collaborative work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Megan, for those excellent remarks, and thank you for the excellent work UNEP is doing for the continent as well. We are delighted for this partnership, and we look forward to take this to take this event to a higher level. I would like to kindly ask the participant to turn on their cameras so to capture the moment together for a group photo. So if you can please turn on your camera just quickly for 2 minutes. I will ask also our communication and the communication colleague from UNEP to please help us with the group photo if they are connected. And thank you so much. Okay, nice smile, please, everyone. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much. So let's continue with our business. It's my pleasure again now to turn to Felix, my colleague here who leads the program for oil and gas, to provide an overview of the AFREC oil and gas program and the critical lead for methane action. Felix, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mehdi, and all participants, all protocols observed. Can you confirm, Mehdi, that you can see my screen?
Yes, but just if you can put the presentation in the presentation mode. Thank you.
Okay. I think that should be better now. So,
Yes,
yeah.
thank you so much.
All right. So thank you very much for this opportunity and for all the participants for coming in for this webinar. My presentation this afternoon, morning, or evening, wherever you are, will be to give you an overview of the oil and gas program and the need for methane action. This is my outline. I'll take you through an introduction, give you a little bit of an landscape of the oil and gas sector in Africa, because it's important for you to understand the status of the African oil and gas sector for you to be able to appreciate why we need methane action, and then I'll conclude. So as an introduction, maybe for those who are still very new or are not very familiar with AFREC, it's important for you to appreciate the fact that this is an AU agency responsible for energy, created back in 2001 with the headquarters in Algiers, Algeria. And we have a broad mandate. The executive director already mentioned that, mainly on energy policies, updating the statistic, mobilizing technical and financial support, and carrying out capacity building and awareness campaigns like these ones that we're doing. We have 8 pillars, and one of those is oil and gas. We are very much cognizant on the continent on the commitments that the member states have put in towards the Paris Agreement. And that's why our programs on energy cuts across both renewable energy, energy efficiency through the clean cooking programs, but also we are cognizant of the fact that Africa is a significant oil and gas producer. And so our programs includes oil and gas. Now, as far as oil and gas program is concerned, our scope includes promoting sustainable development of the sector, mainly to meet the combination or the trilemma between economic, energy security, and environmental goals. So that is one of the things that we are doing as a FREC, as far as the oil and gas program is concerned. The other one is to coordinate the harmonization of continental policies on oil and gas sector in order to ensure we have a just energy transition. We are aware of the need for a transition to cleaner fuels, but we believe that there are peculiar differences that we might have between regions, and Africa is one of those that needs careful balance between the need for clean energy, but also being able to meet the energy demands on the continent. The other one is we work on development of policies and strategies, particularly to expand the domestic market to enable cross-border trading on crude oil products, and natural gas. Why is this important? Is mainly because of the reasons that the executive director has mentioned. Two key problems: 600 million people without access to electricity and 1 billion without access to clean energy, clean cooking. And that's where we are putting a lot of effort right now, for example, on things to do like with LPG and ensuring that we increase that access to cleaner fuels as we transition to much more renewable energies for the future. The other one is we coordinate advisory and technical support in order to boost both individual and institutional capacity in areas of governance of energy in general, but also oil and gas in specific. The last but not least at all is to carry out advocacy on AU positions. Now and then we usually come up, the AU composed of the member states usually come up with positions on energy, particularly for oil and gas, and we promote that in order to attract investment in energy in general, but also in oil and gas, especially on infrastructural development that is sure to promote and increase access to energy on the continent. Now, what is the policy driver for the oil and gas program? And this is where the peculiarity of Africa comes into play. One of the key drivers for our policy is what is known as the African Common Position on Energy Access and Just Transition. This was passed by the Executive Council of the African Union in July 2024, and it has 2022, and it has four major strategic endeavors that the common position is looking at. One is the universal access to energy, which is supposed to enable us realize the Sustainable Development Goal number 7 for cleaner fuel, but also access to energy universally to everybody. The other one is to have a balanced energy mix, which means that the continent is looking at both development of renewable energy and non-renewable energy as in order to meet the energy access gap and demand on the continent. The other one is economic and social transformation, which is looking at policies geared towards industrialization, job creation, and poverty alleviation using the energy sources that we have on the continent. And the last one is climate compatibility. It goes without saying that the awareness that we are creating today on methane emission is one of those that is very key for us to achieve the climate compatibility that the continent needs in the oil and gas sector. So those are the policy drivers for the oil and gas program on the continent. So what is the landscape of the oil and gas sector as we have today? The key figures you should keep in mind is that the continent still have reserves over 125 billion barrels. And we produce daily, in terms of crude oil, close to 7 million barrels. And the daily demand is about 64%, but the refining capacity is much lower than that at 48%. What we see in terms of the demand for oil, it is still growing on the continent, and that's not very different even when we look at the gas, the natural gas on the other side. With 18 trillion cubic meters of gas and production capacity of 268 billion cubic meters per day, we have a global share of production on the globe of 6%, and the annual growth rate for gas demand on the continent is at around 3%. And this is a figure that we see year on year growing, even as we project our future demands on the continent. So when you look at the reserves outlook at present production, if we continue producing at the current rate with the reserves that we have on the continent, we see that even by 2050, we will still have a significant amount of reserves on the continent in order to meet probably demand that will come at that stage. So these are figures to show you the significant role that oil and gas still plays in the energy mix of the continent, and why methane reduction programs are very key. The other one to look at is the supply opportunity outlook based on a business as usual versus a net zero scenario. So we did this study in 2022, and we realized that even with a net zero scenario, we will still have significant supplies opportunity for both crude and natural gas by 2050. And you can see that as far as the continent is concerned, the difference between a business as usual and a net zero scenario does not change significantly. So for you to appreciate where that comes from, let's take, for instance, one of the key problems that we have on the continent, electricity supply. If you look at the sources of electricity supply on the continent, you can still see that over the years, historically, gas overtook coal around 2012, and it has remained high, and that demand is continuing mainly because of the easy access to gas on the continent and the many discoveries that have been made over the last 10 years or so. You will realize that almost 40% of the latest discoveries around the globe has been on the continent. And this is significant in order to meet the access requirement for electricity on the continent. Even when you look at the oil, the difference has not been very much. But the key thing to note here is that while we are promoting the renewable energy programs on the continent, the growth of renewable energies is not growing fast enough to offset the demand from oil and gas. And this is why the program is still very key. Now, when you look at in terms of infrastructure development, pipelines itself, the existing one versus those that have been proposed, you will see that there is still significant infrastructural development for the oil and gas sector. When you look at the existing one for oil, in particular, we have the Chad-Cameroon pipeline, the Tazama oil pipeline between Tanzania and Zambia, and there are more proposed pipelines that are coming up, Niger, Benin, and the East African crude oil pipeline for export from Uganda through Tanga in Tanzania. And you look at the gas on the other side, we still have also significant pipelines that have been already in operation for many years. The West African gas pipeline, the Transmed gas pipeline, which is transporting gas from Algeria via Tunisia to Italy. And we are seeing many others for export, for example, the MGE, the Arab gas pipeline, the Med gas from Algeria, and so on and so forth. There are a number of other gas pipelines that have been proposed that are coming on stream. The African Renaissance gas pipeline, the Trans-Saharan gas pipeline, the Central African pipeline, and so on and so forth. All these are still a pipeline infrastructure that we see growing on the continent. How about LNG terminals? Because LNG is now the future way of transporting natural gas. And we are seeing these developments growing on the continent. They are dominated, of course, in North Africa, mainly Libya, Algeria, and Egypt. We are seeing also terminals operating significantly, and they are growing in Nigeria, Angola, Cameroon, and Equatorial Guinea, and new ones already being proposed, and some under construction in Mozambique and Mauritania. We are seeing also in Djibouti and Tanzania coming up as additional LNG terminals. All these are areas, processes, and facilities that have potential to emit methane in the atmosphere. So with the capacity that we see right now at 75 million tons per annum of LNG, with the future increase of about 135 million tons per annum capacity, it means that the potential to emit methane increases, and that's why the intervention to reduce emission of methane in the oil and gas sector becomes very key. In terms of refineries, we see also most of it concentrated in North Africa. And of course, with the new boost in the Western Africa from the Dangote refinery, increasing 650,000 barrel capacity refinery to produce products on the continent. All these are avenues in which we can see that we will be able to increase probably methane emission on the continent, and other refineries that are coming in planning stage in Uganda at 60,000 barrels. So if you look at the projected demand from refined products capacity of 5.1 billion barrels even by 2040. It means that between now and 2040, or now and 2050, where we are projecting a net zero carbon emissions in the atmosphere, we will still have significant operations of oil and gas on the continent. So why the need for methane? There are at least 6 major reasons, and I'll tell you quickly why we need to have actions on methane on the sector, and why it's very vital. First and foremost, methane is known to contribute about 25% of the global anthropogenic methane emissions, mainly from venting, leakage, and flaring, which are means that can be easily reduced right now in the oil and gas sector. Secondly, it has been shown that the reduction by 45% by 2030 could help actually meet the Paris Agreement. Thirdly, it has been shown through the commitment from the Global Methane Pledge, which is an effort to reduce global emission by at least 30% from the 2020 level by 2030, that if we can do that, we shall then be on the path to at least achieve our objective for the Paris Agreement. Also, 40% of methane emission could be reduced by existing technologies. Some of the examples we have seen could reduce up to 70%. For example, in areas like Saudi Arabia, we have seen examples where methane can be reduced from operations up to 70%. And that's possible. So if it is possible elsewhere, it can be possible on the continent. The other one is that now we are seeing that more than half of African oil and gas producing countries rely at least 50% on oil and gas export revenues. So with that kind of dependency on oil and gas, it means that the commitment or to actually intervene in as far as methane emission is concerned becomes significant. And last but not least, but quite important, is the importance of methane reduction in future trade. We have all seen the recent passing of legislation in the EU Parliament, where they're looking at enforcing methane emission limits on Europe oil and gas imports starting in 2030. What that basically means for the continent, which supplies significant amount of oil and gas to the European market, is that by 2030, a limit on methane emission will be a requirement for you to be able to import. And if that should be the case, then preparation for that should start now and not tomorrow. So the next steps for Africa is, one, to step up awareness campaign on methane action, focusing on detection and mitigation. The other one is to build partnerships like what we are doing right now with UNEP on carbon limits to support our member states, and also to expand opportunities for stakeholders training in the oil and gas sector in as far as methane reduction is concerned. And we're already working with UNEP on this in the coming weeks to ensure that some of the oil and gas producing countries benefit from this campaign that we're launching. And the other one is to harmonize policies of AU member states, focusing mainly on preventing future trade barriers due to methane emission. In conclusion, therefore, these are the key takeaways from my presentation. One is that economic activities and population growth on the continent has increased demand for energy, and this is going to increase over the horizon that we are seeing today. Secondly, is that renewables, as we demand and we desire to have it grow, is not growing as fast enough to meet the demand, meaning that the reliance on oil and gas will still continue for some time. Third one is that we have a common position as the AU member states on access to energy, which is key to achieving SDG number 7, and to have a just transition that promotes both renewable and non-renewable to bridge that access gap that we see on the continent. The fourth one is that new oil and gas discoveries on the continent and the expansion of infrastructure is going to develop because of the new discoveries and the need to meet the economic demands on the continent. Second last is that the increase in the oil and gas development processes has potential, and it has been shown to increase the emission of methane on the continent. And that is why we are now building capacities of stakeholders on the continent to develop policies, but not only develop them, measure methane, and also mitigate those emissions so that we can reduce them significantly to achieve our target of 2030. With those, I thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, my brother Felix, for the outstanding effort and your help to the member states. Thank you also for laying the stage for the next presenters and speakers. As we move forward, I would like again to thank everyone who is participating today in our webinar. It's my pleasure now to invite Ms. Julia Ferrani, OGMP, manager at UNEP, who will be discussing the oil and gas methane partnership 2.0 and its importance in the methane regulation framework. You have the floor.
Many thanks. And also thanks to Mr. Ositi for preparing the ground for my intervention. What I will present today is a voluntary initiative, and I am looking at my slides so that I can share my screen. Just a second. In the meantime, let me start by saying that we will present today an opportunity for Africa to meet the objectives of the Paris Agreement. Reducing methane emissions, especially from the oil and gas sector, is the fastest way, the easiest way, and the most cost-effective way that we have to reduce global warming in the short term. The oil and gas sector has the know-how and the technologies available to do this, and so it is really an opportunity that the world cannot afford to miss. It seems, though, that I'm not able to share my
Can you please send us the presentation so we can share from our side, or any of your colleagues at UNEP who can help?
Let me try again. Just 1 second. Let me send them by email. Apologies, I've done multiple Zoom presentation. I don't know which one, why this one is not working. And luckily, my colleague Queen is assisting.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Queen, please, if you can
Queen,
share from
let
your
me
side.
know when you can see it and share your screen. So, as the presentation loads, Africa has a unique opportunity also because, as we heard from the previous speakers, there are some new explorations of oil and gas underway, and it is much easier to get it right from the start and ensure that these new facilities are designed in a way that lower their methane emissions, as opposed to retrofitting existing facilities. Both can be done and should be done, but certainly there is an opportunity to make it right from the start. So let's, thanks Queen. Let's move to the next slide. The OGMP is the only comprehensive measurement-based reporting framework for the oil and gas sector. It counts over 140 companies that together represent over 40% of the global oil and gas production and over 70% of global LNG flows. You can see on this map all the countries in light blue where our 140 member companies have either operated or non-operated assets. And so our coverage, as you can see, is important, but more can be done in Africa, and we very much hope that this collaboration will help us attract more oil and gas companies from Africa. We cover all the value chain, so production, exploration and production, transmission and distribution. However, refineries are not in scope. We have big international oil companies, we have national oil companies, small independent producers. We have a variety of members in the partnership. Moving to the next slide, we can see that the OGMP, as I mentioned, is a comprehensive reporting framework. It is much more than this. And let me state that the overall objective is not the reporting, is not the measurement, is not the data. It is mitigation. But our theory of change is based on the assumption that if companies do not know where these emissions are, they are not going to be able to reduce them. And so better data, and by better data we mean empirical data, is a means to achieve the objective of mitigation. Also because in case the climate imperative is not a strong enough incentive, there are energy security and economic benefits to reduce methane emissions, because natural gas is a valuable resource that is being wasted by letting it escape in the atmosphere. So as I mentioned, the OGMP is at the same time a comprehensive reporting framework, a community of practice, and increasingly recognized as a global MRV standard. Let me unpack these three elements. Comprehensive reporting framework because it focuses on direct measurements to help companies identify and mitigate the largest emission sources. It covers all material sources from both operated and non-operated assets across all segments of the value chain. Among our members, we have companies like Total, BP, Shell, Eni that have a presence in Africa, and because they participate in the program, they have the obligation to report also emissions from their non-operated assets. So there is already coverage in Africa. We also have Africa-based companies, and we very much hope to increase again our membership in Africa. The OGMP is also a community of practice. It provides a platform for peer learning and experience sharing between industry's experts. By joining the partnership, companies get access to the experts in Europe, but also to the experts in the other 140 companies that may have similar operations, similar challenges, and can share their knowledge and lessons learned. It is also increasingly recognized as a global MRV standard. It is the basis for the European Union regulation. It is influencing other policy and regulatory developments around the world, and it is a possible candidate for the global MMRV framework that the United States and the European Union are in intergovernment. Next slide, Queen. So the beauty of OGMP is that it meets companies where they are on their methane journey. It doesn't require that companies have already figured out how to measure their emissions and to have a good understanding of their data. And it enables them to go at their own pace. Let me provide some examples. The reporting starts the year after a company joins. And so in the meantime, the OGMP team is available to help review draft submission, to provide advice, to put them in touch with other companies. We recently launched a mentoring program. The idea is that companies focus on the most material sources of emissions. We don't want companies to go out and measure every piece of equipment. That's not the point. We just want to make sure that they are aware of what are the main emission sources. And if you don't measure, you don't know. There is a phased approach, different timelines to reach the gold standard for operated and non-operated assets, and we'll explain later what the gold standard is. And again, the gold standard is an aspiration, it's not an obligation. What matters to us is that year after year, every company has a better understanding of their methane emissions, because when companies find out about these emissions, they fix them and they know how to do it, and they are already doing it. We just need more companies to do it and to do it faster. There is also recognition that technologies are evolving, and so there is flexibility embedded in the framework to take this into account. Moving to the next slide, please. What are the reporting requirements? What do companies sign up for when joining the OGMP? To provide a methane reduction target, to submit an implementation plan on how the company plans to achieve the highest levels of reporting, and to provide an annual report on methane emissions from operated and non-operated assets. There is guidance available, publicly available. We'll make sure to share the link to our guidance documents that outline recommended quantification methodologies for the most common material sources. There is guidance on how to develop the implementation plan. There is guidance on uncertainty and reconciliation. And there are other tools beyond OGMP. And I'm sure you'll hear from our carbon limits colleagues on these tools that can already give you a good understanding of your methane emissions. There are opportunities, as I mentioned earlier, to learn from other companies and to learn from experts. We organize regular experience sharing workshops on measurement technologies, on continuous monitoring, and so on and so forth. These are only available to OGMP members. There is an annual in-person conference that we organize for our members, and we recently launched a mentoring program where we match companies. And so there is a mentor and a mentee, and company can be paired and work together on methane emissions data. Moving to the next slide, please. I just wanted to unpack some of the benefits of OGMP membership. As I mentioned, the main one is mitigation. By participating in the program, companies will have a better understanding of their methane emissions. There is also a credibility benefit in the sense that by participating in the program, that is a UN-led initiative, companies can show support to global and national climate efforts under the Paris Agreement and under the Global Methane Pledge. No matter which scenario we look at, the bulk of the reductions needed to achieve the objective of the Global Methane Pledge will have to come from the oil and gas sector, and the OGMP provides an easy way to do that. We work hand in hand with investors, with regulators. And so by joining the program, companies can show to these stakeholders that they're managing their emissions responsibly. There are also market access benefits. Future border adjustment taxes will favor low methane gas that should be demonstrated through the OGMP gold standard. We mentioned earlier that the OGMP is at the basis of the European Union regulation that will be applicable from 2027 to all the gas that is imported to Europe. The OGMP provides opportunities to access funding because it is one of the criteria for funding access from the World Bank's Global Flaring and Methane Reduction Partnership, GFMR. There are also, as I mentioned, knowledge and experience sharing benefit, access to the community of practice, privileged access to Mars, being notified at the very beginning of the Mars notification process. Mars is our satellite program that Megan mentioned and that we will present in more details later on. If the satellites detect a methane plume in one of the OGMP companies' facilities, they will be notified directly. The governments will be informed, as opposed to being notified through the government, which of course takes more time. And what we want in this case is to make sure that the information gets to the relevant stakeholder as soon as possible so that they can reduce the emissions. Moving to the next slide, I'll start wrapping up. I just wanted to present the OGMP reporting levels. This is really the core of OGMP. As we move from level 1 to level 5, there is progressively more accuracy and granularity and confidence in the data. Level 1 is just a number, single number. It will not tell us much about a company's actual emissions. Level 2 is reporting based on emission categories, venting, flaring, fugitives, based though on generic emission factors that we know dramatically underestimate real methane emissions. Level 3 is more granular. It reports by source, so like dehydrators, pneumatic controllers, LNG, but it is based on still generic emission factors. It's only when we move to level 4 and level 5 that companies are required to rely on measurements. Level 4 is measurement at the source level. Level 5 is the reconciliation of source level measurements with site level measurements to ensure that the source level inventory is not missing any relevant source. The gold standard is achieved when companies report their material assets at level 4 and level 5 Moving to the next slide, within 3 years, sorry, for operated assets and 5 years for non-operated assets. However, companies can achieve what we call gold standard pathway if they submit an implementation plan with a target and report at least at level 1. The very good news, without anticipating much from the subsequent presentations, is that there are online tools like MIST from Carbon Limits that can already help companies report at level 3. Why it is so important to measure emissions? I want to spend some time on this. I'll leave you with a case study. One of our members compared their level 3 reporting, so emission factors estimates, with their level 4 reporting for the same reporting year. Not only when they measured, they find more than twice the emissions, but they found them in totally different places. So if that company had based its mitigation strategy on estimates, they would have spent time and money going after sources that were not the most material ones. It's like going to the doctor, and instead of having your blood pressure measured, the doctor tells you, okay, someone who is approximately your age or your weight with these parameters has this range of blood pressure. Would you be reassured, or would you rather have the doctor measuring your blood pressure to be sure that this is actually your blood pressure? That's the same with methane. If you don't measure, you don't know. And if you don't know, you cannot act. And if you don't act, the world is not on track to meet the objectives of the Paris Agreement. So if we move to the next slide, I'll just leave with how to join. There is no fee. There is no membership fee. The company signed a memorandum of understanding with UNEP. And then once the document is signed, the company is officially an OGMP member and can start working on the submission of implementation plan, target, and annual reporting that will only be due the following year. And of course, the UNEP team will always be available to answer any questions. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I'm available for bilateral follow-up discussions if there is interest. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia, for a very clear but also very nice presentation. Thank you. We are pleased to have you with us today. Thank you also for detailing the approach, the requirement, the benefits of joining the oil and gas program, partnership, methane partnership. We will be pleased to work with you to have more African company benefits from this partnership. Thank you so much. Without any further ado, it's my pleasure to invite our friend here, Benjamin Heras, who is the principal consultant at Carbon Limits, who will be giving more details on how to explore methane emission for detection, mitigation, and all the strategies for the detection and mitigation of the methane emission. And I would like to remind the participant that we'll have a Q&A session. So I see some questions coming to the chat. We'll be able to take all the question. Julia and Megan, please remain with us because many questions are addressed to you. Thank you so much. Benjamin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mehdi. Thank you again to our colleagues of UNEP and to all of you from AFREC for putting this together and helping us sort of reach out to you and have the opportunity to tell you more about all the amazing work that we're doing on methane, and most of it actually in collaboration with our friends of the United Nations Environment Program. So I'm going to start sharing screen so I can start to show you a bit of what is it that we work on. Let me see. Great. Just let me know if by any chance the screen sharing is not working or if there's any issues with the...
It's clear, Benjamin. You can go ahead. You can proceed, please.
Great. Thank you. Great. So first of all, let me try to frame a bit about the work that we do. In general, Carbon Limits has been working in climate change mitigation, in particular in the oil and gas sector for now almost 20 years. And basically what we try to do is to bring all of this knowledge and expertise into a set of training modules that have been sort of supported and financed by the United Nations Environment Program, among other different partners at the global scale. This training, basically what it entails is a full presentation that allows participants to understand from the basis of what is methane emissions in the oil and gas sector to very technical topics. So in particular, today we're going to be having a sneak peek of what we call the overview module. This overview module is meant for managers and high or medium level positions in oil and gas companies or governments that do not have the time to go through all of the training. However, we do have a full training that can be accessed to, in particular, government representatives or national oil companies. This is the training that is meant for them. We have 4 core modules that we call them as sort of the basis of what is methane emissions. These consist of the first module that talks about methane emissions and their main emission sources in the oil and gas sector. Then we move into module 2 that has methane detection, measurement, and quantification. Module 3 that talks about methane mitigation and sort of decision-making tools. And then the last one that is methane emissions in upstream operations. We have also a set of technical modules, as I mentioned before. One of them talks about regulatory approaches. This was prepared and it's normally presented by our colleagues in the International Energy Agency. We have the satellite technology, we have flaring emissions, we have LNG value chain, and the newest one that is financing methane emissions. Normally, what we talked about, or when we talk about this training, we're talking about 2 different components. One that is going through content that is preloaded online. So basically, you get granted an access to an online platform that will give you all of the content necessary for you to prepare for the live sessions. And then we have a live session that normally will last around 1.5 hours, where we go into the main topics and sort of dig deeper into some of them and try to tailor a bit of the content, the discussions towards the needs of the country or group that we're talking about. We normally present this to small groups. So these groups can be about 15 to 30 people. And we have a strong emphasis on interactive exercises and open discussions. You're going to have an opportunity to try it out during the session today. And therefore, that is one of the requests that I have for you. So please do not hide your cell phone. I know that some of you might have it on next to you, but what I'm going to ask you to do is to have your cell phone very close by, because we're going to need your cell phone throughout the session of today. So without further ado, perhaps I can move forward into the presentation and sort of give you a sneak peek of what is this overview module. As I mentioned before, overview module is meant for creating a very basic baseline of what is the content that we normally go through the more detailed core modules. This is a module that we normally provide to medium level managers at governments or national oil companies, so they get a sense and a taste of what are methane emissions and why they're so important. So let's say that we picked and choose the most relevant topics among the core modules, so modules 1 to 4, and we present this to them so they get a chance to sort of catch up and sort of understand the general basis. And it is also a great opportunity for them to understand what type of content can be further discussed with people that is more involved in operations or HSE or environmental discussions in your own companies or in your governments. Normally, these live sessions go through a very interactive format where we go through questions that I ask to you and interactive activities that I call live exercises. And then since normally you will have access, you would have access to preloaded content where there is exercise, we will review those questions and sort of provide the right answer. If we have the time today, I know that we're outlining a watch frame, but have the time today, maybe I can give you a taste what we call during this. So guys, get a taste, and perhaps go by our friend AFREC. We sort of start and to provide to this training in more detail to whether your government or your whole company. As groups that we be during. So, as I mentioned before, please use your cell phone camera. Go to this QR code that you have on. For those at the link www.wooclub.com, and that event code is called O module. I'm writing it on the chat for you to just be able to copy paste it in case that's easier. I'm gonna wait for a few seconds so I get the chance to, or you get the chance to connect and interact online. Because as you're aware, we're a bigger group, so it's a bit difficult to get the opportunity to hear from each one of you. But in this case, it's just easier to gather your feedback. Okay, I'm gonna wait a few more minutes. While this happens and while everyone is connecting, just to continue elaborating on this great effort of the methane training, I would like to add that thank you to the support by the United Nations Environment Program, the Environmental Defense Fund, and even other partners, for example, the Clean Air Task Force, Oil and Gas Initiative, amongst others. We have had the opportunity to provide this training to over 70 different stakeholders, covering, I think, over 40 countries worldwide. We have provided this training not only in English, but this training is also available in French, in Russian, in Spanish. Some of the content is also available in Mandarin, Korean, and Japanese, and Arabic. Arabic is another language that we have been using quite a lot as well for deployments in the Middle East and Northern Africa. So, okay, with that, I think we can move forward with the exercises. All right, so let's try to get sort of used to how this works, and let's see, what is your favorite hobby? For those that haven't had the opportunity to connect, please, you can go on top of the screen. You can see that it's wooclub.com, and please use the code OModule, and that's going to grant you access. I see that there's very variable amounts of hobbies here. We have people that love reading, soccer, hiking, music, travel. Amazing. It's always great to hear that there's such a great variety of things to do and sort of things that we enjoy, right? Because it's important to disconnect sometimes here and there from work and our daily lives and sort of enjoy what is it that we like to do. It's not that we're going to be discussing hobbies today, but it's just an opportunity for you to get acquainted with the book club in case you haven't had the opportunity to do so before, so you get a sense of interaction among all of us. So now that we talked about hobbies, thank you so much for your input. Now let's go directly into the topic of methane. So the question I have for you is, which do you think are the main sectors that contribute to methane emissions in your country? I think that we are still receiving answers regarding hobbies, but now I have changed the question, and now the question is in regards to the main sectors that contribute to methane emissions in your country. I see that I'm already receiving oil and gas, energy in general, agriculture. Does any of your countries have a high percentage of emissions coming from landfills or the waste sector in general? Okay, I see that most of you agree that there is a chunk that comes from agriculture and oil and gas. This is definitely not, how can I say it, unusual. It's definitely one of the, or two of the main sectors that represent global global methane emissions to a higher extent, sure being one of the most important ones, given how most of our countries sort of rely on this type of activities, economically speaking. The same goes with oil and gas. And of course, this depends on if our countries, to start with, have oil and gas reserves, and if these reserves are being extracted and sort of used. So that's an important factor to keep in mind. As I mentioned before, this is for getting a sense of how your methane emissions might be coming from, but we're going to be focusing only in the oil and gas and methane emissions during this session. So now, as I mentioned before, it might be different, the amount of importance, or the level of importance that the oil and gas sector have in your country, depending on the participation that it has on your energy share, or the existence or not of oil and gas reserves, etc. So how important do you think is the oil and gas sector in your country? If you can put a little dash and identify the country that you're referring to, that might be probably a bit easier. Otherwise, thank you for the input provided, where it is definitely, I can see, extremely important, very important. The amount of, well, the oil and gas sector in general, we can look at it from the perspective of the economy, sort of support that it provides to our national budgets, but also the importance that it has on providing us energy security, right? So thank you so much for those that have already identified your countries. I see that we have countries beyond the sort of physical limits of Africa. I see that we have some people from the US and the UK, which I really appreciate that. But I see, for example, Cote d'Ivoire, I see Senegal, Mozambique. So it's really good to see that there is a huge diversity of countries represented by all of you. All right, thank you so much for your input. Now let's go over one of the first topics that are part of our training, and in this case are in regards to methane emission sources and detection technologies. So to start with, and to sort of set the ground, in which part of the oil and gas value chain occurs methane emissions? I'm not talking about where occurs the most, I'm talking about where do they occur, to a minimum extent, to a large extent. Where do you think that oil and gas methane emissions occur in the value chain? I see that we are already receiving some answers coming from the oil exploration and production. We have some people also answering gas processing, some others on oil transport, and other ones on oil refining. And now there is a big pool moving into the direction of the gas value chain and the upstream sector. We will discuss this in more detail in a few seconds, but thank you so much. I really appreciate all of your input. This is very interesting to see where you guys are voting. But to try to conclude a bit this question and sort of like give you the sense of what this question was trying to highlight, is the fact that methane emissions can basically occur across the oil and gas value chain. These can occur at a minimum level or almost negligible level of emissions, especially those that are in the value chain of oil only. And as we go further away from the upstream part of oil production or oil, those emissions tend to reduce quite significantly. However, in the natural gas value chain, of course, emissions will be more persistent throughout the value chain. Without giving you more details, now let's move into a more detailed question in this case, which is, which part of the oil and gas value chain occur or has the largest amount or more frequent methane emissions? So would you say that it is more on the, I think you see it on your left side, if I'm not mistaken, which is sort of more on the upstream. Do you think it occurs somewhere in the middle, midstream, or do you think it goes all the way at the end, which is downstream? I see majority is going into the upstream sector. A few of you are in what is still considered in some parts upstream, but also midstream. Right. Another thing that I wanted to highlight, please, I'm trying to follow up the discussions in the chat. So if there are any questions that come on your way as we are presenting this information, please feel free to write it down, and I'm gonna try to address it. I really hope that I don't miss it, because I see that there's a lot of participation going on. All right, so just to conclude on this question, most of the emissions occur in the upstream sector. When we talk about upstream, we're talking about oil and gas exploration and production. It also includes gas gathering and also gas processing. So of these processes, that's where we will normally identify most of the methane emissions in the oil and gas sector. Why is that? Because there's a lot of processes that are involved that are purifying the oil and gas, and therefore sort of eliminating all of those residues or byproducts that are not really necessary. And in that process, that's where we lose a lot of methane emissions to the atmosphere by either flaring, by venting, or by leaks. And leaks, that's where we need to be extremely picky on trying to identify them and realize that it can be a serious problem in our facilities. Right, moving forward, as I mentioned before, please, any question, feel free to write it down on the chat as I move forward. So I have 4 different pictures here. I cannot even tell you what equipment component they are. I just have these pictures that I took on a site visit. And the question that I have for you is, with these pictures that you see on screen, which one of the pictures show sources of methane emissions? Do you think that it is, for example, only one of them? Or is it these 2, or these 2, or the 4 of them, or none of them? I don't know. What do you guys think? Again, feel free to answer or write down anything on the chat so I get the opportunity to sort of interact a bit more with you and get some input as well on these open questions that I'm just throwing in the air. Normally, when we're talking to smaller groups, we get the opportunity to interact almost on a one-on-one, and we get to have a more open conversation on this. All right, so taking into account your input on sort of where you placed the different indicators, I see that there's a big difference, or like a big amount of different opinions here. But in reality, well, I can tell you that all of these images are actually showing you methane emission sources. The only tricky part here is that what I'm showing you now are just pictures that are taken and that emulate the way we look at facilities, which is with our naked eye. Here, we're not using any technology, we're not using any support, anything else. We're not using any sensors to help us out. And if that's the way we're gonna do it, then we're gonna be faced with the issue of not knowing what is going on. And therefore, that's why it's important word C. All right, cool. And so it was actually, so again, to the side with anything. What happens if we bring with us some technology to help us out seeing what is actually going on there? You see how we change details of what type of technology we're using here, because I'm going to test that knowledge in a few seconds. But feel free to write down on the chat what type of technology we're using here at our. So we see that there are definitely emissions coming from all of these sources. And Emmanuel, you're right. These are oil, or in other words, email. Thank you for your comments. So now, this is a huge difference, right? Now we're technologies have been on something we cannot see, and that's one of the best characteristics in the processing of the gas. Methane does not have a color, so therefore we cannot really sense in our facilities. But in reality, it's a bit difficult to actually know the amount of it, or if it's actually methane emissions, or maybe it's vapor, right? So we need to understand better what type of processes are going on in our facilities. Moving forward, I will ask you to please match the images that you see on top, which are the type of technologies that are used for detection. We have different technologies. So for example, we have drones, we have satellites, and we have infrared cameras. So which one do you think belongs to what? Let me see if there are any questions here. Geoffrey, just to answer to your question, how much is the whole program? Can students in this field secure a sponsor program? In this case, the program is given for free. As I mentioned before, this program is focused towards national oil companies and governments. If this, trying to understand a bit your question, it might come from academia, and academia might be an area where we can support as well. Please, what I would suggest is that you reach out to AFREC or myself, and sort of we can follow this up. We don't normally provide this program on an individual basis. We will like to provide it to a group of people. All right, great. Thank you for your answers. Now, without creating any more fuss, let's see how we did it. I see that most of you got it right. We have a successful rate of responses over 80%, and that is remarkable. Let me write down my email, sorry, on the chat so I don't forget it, and we can move forward with the discussions. All right, so option A is drones, and this can be probably the most tricky one. Why? Because when we see it, we actually see a satellite image that overlooks at the site, but in reality, all of these rotating dots, that's the route that the drone has followed, and here is where it has identified methane emissions. It is normal that this happens, because in this case, we know that the plume is coming from this side, and with knowing the wind speed and other aspects, technical aspects of the site, we can indirectly try to calculate the amount of emissions that are being emitted. So that's important to think about. But these are drone technology that we're using. Then we have option B, that is satellites. And this is private satellite images for pretty much anyone that is willing to, but they have one of the best performing technology in the market. And this is not to sort of promote, this is just to give them credit of the picture on screen. This is GIGSat. And we have in option C, infrared cameras that uses an infrared sensor that allow us to see what our eyes cannot see. To track on these, let's try to look at and sort of hear your thoughts on what you think are the advantages and disadvantages of satellites. I will encourage that some of you focus on the disadvantages, because sort of normally we tend to go all the way or answer this question, which advantages, and then we kind of leave the disadvantages part a bit alone. So I'll be waiting for some of your input. I think all of these answers are following a very good logic behind it. The only one that I will challenge is on the disadvantages, the expensive side of it. When you think about it, satellite technology will be extremely useful to identify super emitting events. When we talk about super emitting events, there's a growing consensus in the international community that is anything that it goes beyond 100 kilograms per hour of emissions to the atmosphere. In that context, if we're using satellite technology and we're paying a provider to give us these images, and we identify these large emitting sources, as soon as we mitigate them, we're gonna get that money back almost immediately. So this argument of expensive, when you factor in the mitigation opportunities that it brings to the table, I think it can easily be diminished or sort of moved into other type of technologies. I would definitely argue that satellite technologies, when you think about the actual benefits and the economic benefits that it can bring, I would say that it is not expensive in the long run. The other aspects that you're mentioning in terms of advantages and disadvantages, I think those are fairly aligned to the things that we've been discussing during today. And you have certain knowledge about them. So thank you so much for your input. Advantages, let's put it in a general sense. They can cover large areas, so they can be targeted. It can also allow us to identify super emitting events, and that's probably one of the largest benefits of it. And it can also help us on planning where we can focus most of our efforts. So imagine that we have a country with thousands of facilities, and we need to identify which ones we need to focus on given the amount of emissions that they're emitting. Then satellite technology is going to be super helpful on identifying those areas or facilities that require more attention, and then we can then deploy other technologies to help us identify the emission sources in particular that are creating such emissions. Disadvantages, I will say that they don't perform well, or they don't perform in some cases in offshore facilities. They are extremely sensitive towards cloudy environments or to densely forest areas, or areas that are covered by snow, or that they are too close to the poles. But those would be one of the very few things that I will highlight as part of the disadvantages of satellites. Again, happy to answer any of the questions that you might have. So now let's move into mitigation, right? So we looked at, okay, we're using technology, we're identifying emissions, and then, okay, we have identified emissions. We saw that we used infrared cameras to identify the emissions in these 40 emission sources. Now what? Which sources mitigate? Do you think that all of them? Do you think that some of them or none? Dr. Walid, efficiency of this method, if you are referring to satellite technology, this depends heavily on the type of provider that we're talking about, if this is a public or private provider, and which one in particular. So it's very technology provider specific. So it's a bit difficult to answer it in general, but I will say that it is quite efficient in identifying the high emitters in a region. All right, so I see that we have and here when all are or can be mitigated. The full point here is all mitigated is that we can reduce methane emissions by 100%, but we can reduce them by a very large amount. And all of these mitigation is already, or mitigation options, mitigation technologies are already available in the market. We're not talking about high tech. We're not talking about research and sort of the latest technological advancements in the world. We are talking about something as simple as tightening up some bulbs. We're talking about changing seals. We're talking about changing one component to the other, capturing the gas. So very simple solutions. In some cases, you can do it as soon as you identify the emission source. In some other cases, maybe you need to plan in months and I will do proper mitigation on certain emission sources that requires this maintenance stop in our facilities. But otherwise, I would say it's fairly simple. Now, so we talked about sort of the technicalities, right? The emission sources, identification of emissions, what technologies are out there, how can we mitigate them? Now let's move into what is it that is happening at the global scale that is moving methane action to the front and on. Some of them have already been identified and mentioned by our friends in AFREC and UNEP in their presentations. But here, let's move into sort of connecting the dots. Sort of what does it actually mean in terms of numbers or in terms of equivalence? So to give one example, we have a study that was presented where they said that if 45% of methane emissions from the oil and gas sectors are to be reduced globally, this will be equivalent to what? Is it 1,300 coal-based power plants? Is it 1/3 of all coal-based power plants worldwide? Or is it 250 coal-based power plants? I see that number 2 is winning. Number 3 is sort of the least votes. So I see that you are thinking that there's a huge amount of emissions, right, that are to be mitigated. 45% of the global methane emissions. So to stop all of the surprise factor here, well, the first 2 answers are correct. Why are they correct? Well, because they are actually the same. They represent the same. When we talk about 1/3 of all coal-based power plants worldwide, we're talking about 1,300 coal-based power plants. Okay, so it is a lot of emissions that we can mitigate and a lot of benefits that we can sort of accomplish by reducing them. Let Julia just mention in her presentation that methane on moving so fast and trying to support as much as we can on methane mitigation and awareness raising. Now, another question to sort of set the stage on how big the challenge is. The question is, according to the Sustainable Development Scenario from the International Energy Agency, which is the level of methane emissions that needs to be achieved by 2030? Just out of context, so you understand, right now we are around we're emitting about 80 million tons of methane. So this is the current amount of emissions that we have as of today, give it or take. Now we have options A, B, or C. So option A is saying we need to go from 80 million tons of methane to 21 million tons of methane by 2030. Or option B, and let me hide it because I cannot see. Option B is telling us, okay, now we're emitting about 80 million tons. By 2030, we need to emit 38 million tons. Or option C is saying, let's go from 80 to 55. So how big do you think this jump is from 80 to 21, from 80 to 38, or from 80 to 55? Let's see what you guys think. It's fairly divided, your answers. So let's see which one you think is the right one. And the right one is 21. And again, this is just to illustrate the great challenge that we have in our hands on reducing methane emissions from 80 million tons of methane to 21 million tons of methane by the end of this decade. And let's remember that we are not in 2020, not even 2021, we are way into 2024. So the challenge becomes more and more urgent for us to be able to comply with what we call sustainable development scenario, which means that we are reaching the Paris Agreement goals and we are on track on a sustainable development future. So simple as that. Question that I have for you is your country country or company part of any international or national initiative to reduce methane emissions? If so, which one? So I'm not only asking for a yes or no answer, I'm asking also to provide which one you're part of. We can talk about the oil and gas methane partnership that applies to oil and gas companies. We can talk about the global methane pledge that applies to governments. We can talk about global methane initiatives that applies to governments. We can talk about oil and gas decarbonization charter that also applies to oil and gas companies. So yeah, I see that we get a couple of answers that are more targeted: OGMP, Global Methane Pledge, Global Methane Production Pledge. Great. I see that there are some initiatives that your countries are part of oil and gas methane partnership. Great. So that's great news. I'm going to launch the journey for access to not only a set of tools and knowledge that can give you the possibility to access to international finance. And that's something that we can discuss already in one of the modules that we're offering, which is methane financing. Thank you so much for your input. Here, maybe I can ask Mehdi or Felix if you can indicate how much time do we have to see if we can go to some other questions.
Benjamin, we would like to open the floor for some Q&A, so please, if you can wrap up in 7 minutes maximum.
Sure. So basically, I can just wrap up in a couple of minutes. Well, first of all, thank you, Mehdi. I would like you to take these key takeaways with you, because getting access to a more detailed methane training that we offer together with United Nations Environment Program authors, and that we're sort of there supporting that effort. One, addressing methane, you name it, Paris Agreement goals, sustainable development, to have a future that will allow us to continue having a normal life, to not be able or to not be experiencing more than extreme weather events. As you know, we are already in that pathway, but let's try to reduce that likelihood as much as we can. Second point, the oil and gas sector is one of the greatest sources of man-made methane emissions. And this is probably a very self-explanatory one. We have, of course, agriculture and waste, and it depends on your own economic activities and the way your country context, sort of how it works in your own countries. The third point is the international drivers are asking for urgent methane action. And this is something that you can already perceive, because all of the climate talks move from ignoring methane in the oil and gas sector into now having proper discussions and trying to support the oil and gas sector on reducing their emissions as much as possible. And then number 4 is that there are many benefits and available tools to mitigation today. Which ones? Well, OGMP, Global Methane Pledge, Oil and Gas Decarbonization Charter, Global Methane Initiative, you name it. There are several and many tools and initiatives that can help you on implementing and supporting you on the methane journey. All right, I'm going to stop here. So I'm mindful of time and allow for a few questions. And then if we have time, we can go back to more questions that I have for you.
Many thanks, Benjamin. Please join me in thanking and congratulating Benjamin for his excellent presentation. You have the chat, but you have also the React feature in your Zoom. I will move quickly to the Q&A session, and Benjamin was so kind to respond to so many questions while he was presenting, but I will start with the question addressed to the other presenter, those that I see in the chat. Then I will open the floor for a question, and for that you can raise your hand. The first question I have, I hope that I've seen everything here in the chat, is addressed to Megan. And the question is, Megan, I hope that you are still with us. And by the way, I thank all the participants because I see that most of them are still with us. We thank you. Megan, the first question is for you. How and which satellites data is used to accurately measure and monitor methane emission in the Middle East? Megan, I hope that you can take this question.
Absolutely, thank you, Mehdi. So, the satellite data that we use comes from a number of different publicly available satellites. So there's about approximately 15 satellites that we're harnessing. We have a number of remote sensing experts housed within UNEP-SINEO, who are, which I'm happy to provide more technical detail on, and exactly how we're combining images from multiple different satellites to get the most accurate, comprehensive picture of point sources on the ground. And one final note on this is that this is the methodology that we apply around the world. So including the Middle East, of course, different countries and different regions have different potential for satellite coverage. Some areas we're able to see more satellite images due to various factors like cloud coverage. But the methodology and the satellites that we employ are the same around the world.
Thank you, Megan. I will move quickly to the second question. The second question is for Julia, and it reads, what is the rate of success and effectiveness of the OGMP system? Julia, if you can take this question, please.
Thank you.
Effectiveness.
I'm here. Thank you. It depends what we mean by rate of success, right? If the rate of success is the number of companies that joined, we more than doubled our membership since we launched the initiative. For the number of companies who achieved gold standard reporting, we need to wait for this year, because this year marks the 3rd year of participation in the program for companies that joined when we launched the program in 2020. And so we will know how many of them managed to report at the highest levels. If the success is the emissions decreasing, well, I'm afraid that emissions number will go worse before they get better, because as more companies measure, then there will be more emissions. But the good news is that companies will have this information about their emissions and will be able then to reduce them. So there are many metrics of success. Let's add one, that is the number of Africa-based companies that join the partnership, and let's reassess in a few months what is our success.
Thank you so much. I see other questions that are being answered as we speak. Please, I will ask anyone who has further questions to please raise his and her hand, and we can take some questions. So please feel free to request for the floor, if any. Otherwise, I see Megan. Thank you, Megan. Thank you so much for sharing your email. I've shared the email of Felix. Benjamin has shared his email. So you have the contact of everyone. Julia too. Thank you so much. And yes, so you have all our contacts, and please feel free to reach out at any time. So I don't see. Thank you, Dr. Walid. Benjamin, thank you. Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, my brother Felix, everyone here in the meeting. I think we can wrap up, and we are coming to the closing segment. And I will invite our executive director to provide some closing remark and conclude the discussion. Thank you so much, Mr. Rashid.
Thank you very much, Mahdi. First of all, I joined all the participants to thank the presenter. Really, it is very interesting, informative, and rich information. We thank you very much, and I think we already we are in partnership, and I think we are in the beginning of the journey. Of course, we plan for online capacity building for our African member state, and also as the pilot phase, we are going to also planning for the physical capacity building for 3 countries, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya. And I think we are, as AFREC, we believe the importance of this initiative for the future of African energy oil sectors, especially. And really, we cannot say more to thank UNEP and Carbon Limit for their support and for dedication to advance this initiative. And AFREC as a partner, we are also committed to work with you and advancing this initiative. Finally, I would like to thank all participants for their time and being with us up to the end of this webinar. Is amazing number actually, and it seems that it is really give an indication how this topic is important, and also thank interpretation also that facilitate this communication among ourselves. Thank you very much, Mahdi, and hand to you.
Thank you so much, Executive Director. Thank you, everyone, again, for joining us, the UNEP team and Carbon Limit. Thanks. I can't thank you enough, because I just, when I joined AFREC, it was only now 3 months, and in 2 months, we managed to make this and to prepare also for the online training. I know that many member states are here in this meeting, so I would like to remind everyone that we have invited the ministries to nominate at least 1 or 2 participants to join our online training. This is just the beginning. We have very ambitious plan to roll out topics related to energy in general in Africa. Thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to see you in the next webinar. We'll be in touch through our emails, and we'll communicate with you. Thank you so much, and have a lovely day. Good afternoon to everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay.